I watched my own cousin destroy someone's $3,000 dress with wedding cake, laughing as security dragged the nobody away. 24 hours later, I discovered that nobody was about to become the richest woman in our city. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. My name is Vera Chen, and I'm 28 years old. I work in marketing, live in a studio apartment, and drive a car that's older than some of the champagne being served at this story. I've never been comfortable around wealth, but I've always been fascinated by how money changes people. What I witnessed that night changed everything I thought I knew about power, cruelty, and justice. The person who humiliated an innocent woman was my cousin Sloan Whitmore. We share the same grandmother, but that's where our similarities end. Sloan is 26 and has never worked a day in her life because she doesn't need to. Her trust fund generates more money in a month than I make in a year. She drives a white Tesla, lives in a penthouse Daddy bought her, and treats service workers like they're invisible. I've watched her reduce waitresses to tears just because she could, but I never thought she'd go as far as she did that night. The woman she targeted was Quinn Nakamura, 29 years old, sitting quietly at a back table during what should have been a magical evening. Quinn had dark hair pulled into an elegant updo, wore a dress that probably cost more than my rent, and carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that made you want to know her story. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, wasn't fishing for attention, wasn't playing the social games everyone else seemed obsessed with. Maybe that's exactly why Sloan noticed her. This all happened at the wedding of Celeste Ashford and Damon Mitchell at Rosewood Manor, the kind of venue where they charge you just to look at their brochure. The Ashford family has old money, the kind that comes with marble statues and oil paintings of dead relatives. They've been wealthy so long they've forgotten what it feels like to check your bank balance before buying groceries. I was only there because Sloan needed a +1, and apparently I was desperate enough to say yes. I should have known better. Sloan has been using me as her charity case since we were kids, the poor cousin she could parade around to show how generous and inclusive she was. But free champagne and fancy food can make you ignore a lot of red flags. What I didn't know was that Quinn wasn't just some random guest who wandered into the wrong social circle. She wasn't there by accident, and she definitely wasn't the helpless victim Sloan thought she was targeting. The truth about who Quinn really was would surface exactly 24 hours later, and when it did, it would flip everything upside down. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let me tell you about the moment I realized that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most power, and sometimes the cruelest person is about to learn a lesson they'll never forget. The whole thing started when Sloan had too much champagne and decided she didn't like the way Quinn was sitting alone, minding her own business. Rosewood Manor looked like something out of a fairy tale, the kind of place where you're afraid to touch anything because it probably costs more than your college education. Crystal chandeliers hung from 30-foot ceilings, and every surface seemed to be made of marble or gold. The wedding had a budget that could have bought my entire apartment building, and it showed in every perfectly placed orchid and hand-calligraphed place card. I felt like a fraud the moment I walked in. My best dress, the one I'd saved up 3 months to buy, looked like it came from a discount rack next to the designer gowns floating around me. Women wore jewelry that could fund small countries, and men adjusted cufflinks that probably cost more than my car. Everyone moved with the casual confidence that comes from never having to check price tags or worry about whether your credit card will get declined. Sloan, of course, fit right in. She glided through the crowd in a silk dress that probably cost more than I make in 2 months, air-kissing other wealthy 20-somethings and name-dropping vacation destinations I'd only seen in magazines. She introduced me to her friends with that same patronizing smile she'd perfected since childhood. "This is my cousin Vera," she'd say, her hand resting on my shoulder like she was presenting a charity case. "She works so hard at her little marketing job. Isn't that sweet? She's so dedicated to the working world." The way she said working world made it sound like I was performing some quaint hobby rather than paying rent and buying groceries. Her friends would nod politely and then immediately pivot the conversation back to their upcoming trips to the Hamptons or their latest Pilates instructor drama. I spent the cocktail hour nursing a single glass of champagne and trying not to stare at the ice sculptures that were probably melting away more money per minute than I earned per hour. The ceremony itself was beautiful in that overwhelming way that makes you feel small. Celeste looked stunning in a dress that required its own zip code, and Damon seemed genuinely happy, though I couldn't help but wonder if love always came with this much pressure to perform perfection. During the reception, I found myself people-watching from our assigned table near the front. That's when I first noticed Quinn. She sat alone at table 12, which seemed odd, given how carefully orchestrated everything else was. She wasn't checking her phone constantly like most people do when they're uncomfortable. She wasn't trying to catch anyone's attention or flag down waiters for more wine. She just sat there with perfect posture, occasionally smiling at something she observed, completely content in her own company. There was something magnetic about her composure. While everyone else seemed to be performing their wealth and status, Quinn simply existed. Her dress was elegant but understated, her jewelry minimal but clearly expensive. She moved with the kind of grace that money can't buy, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than a trust fund. I caught myself staring at her several times throughout dinner, wondering what her story was and why she seemed so comfortable being alone in a room full of people desperately trying to impress each other. The trouble started during the cake-cutting ceremony. Sloane had been drinking steadily since cocktail hour, and I could see that dangerous glint in her eyes that usually meant someone was about to become her entertainment. She kept glancing over at Quinn's table with a look I recognized from childhood, the same expression she wore right before she'd destroy my sand castles or tell my parents I'd broken something she'd actually broken herself. God, look at Miss Mystery over there, Sloane slurred, nodding toward Quinn. Sitting all alone like she's too good for the rest of us. Someone should go talk to her, don't you think, Vera? I suggested maybe we should just leave Quinn alone since she seemed perfectly content. But Sloane wasn't listening. She was already formulating whatever cruel plan was brewing in her champagne-soaked brain. I tried to include her earlier, Sloane continued, which was a complete lie. Asked her to join our conversation about the charity auction next month. She just looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language and said she was fine where she was. So rude. The way Sloane told it, Quinn had been snobbish and dismissive, but I'd witnessed that interaction from across the room. Quinn had politely declined joining their group with a genuine smile, probably recognizing the type of people she'd be dealing with. She was smart enough to avoid Sloane's circle, which only made Sloane more determined to drag her into it. When the 7-tier cake was wheeled out, Sloane suddenly stood up with that fake bright smile she used when she was about to do something terrible. You know what? I think I'll bring our lonely friend a piece of cake. Kill her with kindness. Before I could stop her, Sloane grabbed a plate with an enormous slice of the elaborate fondant creation and started walking toward Quinn's table. Her steps were slightly unsteady, and she carried the plate like it was a weapon instead of a peace offering. Quinn looked up as Sloane approached, her expression politely curious but guarded. She probably sensed what was coming. "Hi there," Sloane said with exaggerated sweetness. "I thought you might want some cake since you've been sitting here all by yourself. It's really quite delicious." Quinn started to politely accept the gesture, but as she reached for the plate, Sloane suddenly stumbled forward. The entire piece of cake exploded across Quinn's chest and into her hair, covering her gorgeous dress in white frosting and raspberry filling. The impact was so forceful that Quinn's chair tilted backward. Frosting dripped from her dark hair onto her lap, and cake crumbs scattered across the floor around her feet. The beautiful dress she'd worn was completely ruined, stained beyond repair with red berry sauce that looked almost like blood against the fabric. "Oh my God," Sloane gasped, dramatically, pressing her hand to her chest. "I'm so sorry. I must have tripped. How clumsy of me." But I saw her feet. I saw how she'd deliberately stepped forward, how she'd angled the plate for maximum damage. This wasn't an accident. This was calculated cruelty designed to humiliate someone who'd done absolutely nothing wrong. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Quinn's face in that moment after the cake hit her. She didn't scream or cry or make a scene like most people would have. She just sat there for a heartbeat, frosting dripping from her hair, and looked at Sloane with this expression of profound disappointment. Not anger, not shock, just sadness that another human being could be so deliberately cruel. The worst part was my own cowardice. I'd sat there frozen while security escorted Quinn out, watching her walk away with her head held high despite being covered in cake and humiliated in front of 100 strangers. I'd had a dozen opportunities to speak up, to tell security what really happened, to call out Sloane's lie about being attacked. Instead, I'd stayed silent like everyone else, protecting myself instead of doing what was right. By 6 in the morning, I gave up on sleep. I made coffee and started searching for Quinn online, using the guest list I'd glimpsed earlier and cross-referencing social media accounts. It took 2 hours, but I finally found her LinkedIn profile. Quinn Nakamura, Development Director at City Hope Foundation, a small nonprofit that provided educational resources to underprivileged kids. The irony was crushing. Sloane, who'd never worked a day to help anyone but herself, had humiliated someone who dedicated her life to helping others. Quinn's profile showed her volunteering at literacy programs, organizing fundraisers for school, supplies, and working with families who couldn't afford basic educational resources. She was everything Sloane pretended to be at charity galas, where she posed for photos and wrote tax-deductible checks. I called in sick to work and drove downtown to City Hope Foundation's offices. The building was modest, probably saved them money that could go toward their programs instead of fancy headquarters. I sat in my car for 20 minutes rehearsing what I'd say, wondering if Quinn would even want to see me or if she'd associate me with Sloane's cruelty. The receptionist directed me to a small office where Quinn was reviewing grant applications. She looked up when I knocked, and I expected to see anger or at least wariness in her eyes. Instead, she seemed genuinely surprised and invited me to sit down. I came to apologize, I started, but Quinn held up her hand. "You didn't throw cake at me," she said simply. "You have nothing to apologize for." I didn't stop it either. I saw what Sloane was planning and I just sat there. Quinn studied my face for a moment. "Most people who witness cruelty become accomplices through their silence, but you came here. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." We talked for nearly an hour. Quinn was gracious about the whole incident, explaining she was used to that kind of treatment from wealthy social circles. She'd grown up poor, worked her way through college, and still felt like an outsider in high society situations. What struck me most was her phone constantly buzzing with calls she'd dismiss as work-related. I caught glimpses of the caller IDs, wedding planner, florist, catering solutions. When I asked if everything was okay, Quinn smiled mysteriously and mentioned she had her own wedding tomorrow evening, a small ceremony with close friends. I was making dinner the next evening when my phone started exploding with notifications. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, even LinkedIn were lighting up with posts about some massive wedding happening across town. I almost ignored it until I saw the first photo. Quinn stood at the altar in a breathtaking ivory gown that probably cost more than my entire yearly salary, exchanging vows with a man I recognized from business magazines. Adrian Castellanos, the tech billionaire who'd revolutionized cloud computing and was worth somewhere around $8 billion. The ceremony was taking place at the Meridian Grand Ballroom, a venue so exclusive they don't even list prices on their website, because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through more photos. Quinn, the woman who'd sat humbly in that nonprofit office just hours earlier, was now surrounded by celebrities, politicians, and business titans. The guest list read like a Forbes magazine cover story. The flower arrangements alone probably cost more than most people's cars, but what stunned me most was Quinn herself. She looked exactly the same as she had at the Ashford wedding, completely comfortable and unimpressed by the spectacle around her. While her new husband beamed with joy and guests took selfies with the elaborate ice sculptures, Quinn maintained that same quiet grace I'd witnessed the night before. Money hadn't changed her. She'd simply always had access to it and chose not to flaunt it. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Quinn hadn't been some random guest who'd wandered into the wrong social circle at the Ashford wedding. She'd been there evaluating Rosewood Manor as a potential venue for her own celebration. The constant phone calls from wedding vendors, the way she'd dismissed them as work calls, her mysterious smile when she mentioned her small ceremony. Nothing about this was small. Social media was having a field day connecting the dots. Someone had posted side-by-side photos of Quinn covered in cake the night before, and Quinn in her wedding gown, with captions about karma and justice. The story was going viral by the hour. Cakegate was trending nationally. The same security team that had escorted Quinn out of Rosewood Manor in humiliation was now providing VIP protection for one of the city's most powerful couples. The irony was so perfect it felt like fiction. My phone rang while I was still processing everything. Unknown number. Hello, Vera. This is Quinn Castellanos. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from the Foundation's visitor log. Castellanos. She was already using her married name. I wanted you to know that kindness always finds its way back to the people who show it. Thank you for yesterday. It meant more than you know. I could barely form words. Quinn, I had no idea who you were. I know, that's exactly why it mattered. You didn't apologize to me because you thought it would benefit you somehow. You did it because it was right. The woman who could have destroyed Sloane's reputation with a single phone call had chosen grace instead. She'd endured public humiliation from someone who didn't deserve to breathe the same air, and she'd handled it with more class than I'd ever seen. The fallout for Sloane was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, the video someone had secretly recorded of the cake incident was everywhere. Social media users dissected every frame, showing how Sloane had deliberately aimed the plate and stepped forward with clear intent. Her fake stumble looked ridiculous in slow motion. The Ashford family quietly distanced themselves from her, removing her from future guest lists and social events. Several of her wealthy friends stopped returning her calls, suddenly too busy with their own lives to associate with someone who'd become a public embarrassment. The country club where she spent most afternoons started finding reasons why her usual table wasn't available. Sloane tried to control the narrative, posting a carefully crafted apology on Instagram about misunderstandings and alcohol affecting her judgment. But the internet doesn't forgive easily, especially when the victim turns out to be someone who spends her life helping underprivileged children, while the aggressor has never worked a meaningful day in her life. What surprised me most was Quinn's response to all the attention. She could have destroyed Sloane completely with a single interview or lawsuit. Instead, she released a brief statement asking people to focus on kindness rather than revenge, and donated $50,000 to literacy programs in Sloane's name. Even her justice was graceful. The experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I realized I'd spent years being intimidated by wealth, assuming that money automatically meant superiority or wisdom. Quinn showed me that true class has nothing to do with your bank account and everything to do with how you treat people when you think nobody important is watching. 3 months later, Quinn reached out again. Not Mrs. Castellanos calling from her mansion, just Quinn, asking if I wanted to grab coffee. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place she probably visited regularly before her marriage, but could now buy outright without checking her account balance. I have a proposition, she said over our lattes. City Hope Foundation is expanding, and we need someone who understands both marketing and genuine human connection. Interested? The job offer wasn't charity or pity. Quinn had done her research, looked into my work history and skills. She wanted to hire me because she'd seen my character during our first meeting when I'd shown up to apologize for something that wasn't my fault. 6 months later, I'm the communications director for a foundation that's doubled its impact since Quinn's marriage brought national attention to our work. I help tell stories about kids who get their first books, families who learn to read together, and communities that transform through education. But the most important lesson wasn't about career advancement or networking. It was about courage. Real courage isn't about being fearless or strong or having enough money to protect yourself from consequences. It's about doing the right thing even when it's uncomfortable, even when it won't benefit you, even when everyone else is choosing silence. I learned that the most powerful people in the room are often the ones who don't need to prove it, and sometimes standing up for someone changes your life more than theirs.